Hi friends, welcome to Python Boto3 Essentials for AWS Cloud Automation course. And this is Narendra. First, let me go with Introduction to AWS Cloud Automation. So basically, what is mean by AWS Cloud Automation? See simply, AWS Cloud Automation is the process of automating repetitive and manual tasks in the AWS cloud using scripting languages and tools. First, let me give some of the repetitive tasks like deleting unused EBS volumes, terminating ideal or untagged EC2 instances, cleaning up unattached security groups, cleaning up old Lambda function versions, sending resource usage reports via email, creating AMIs, project environment provision for dev, test, pre-prod and prod, setting up identical environments across multiple projects, deploying packages and configuring servers. See, these are some of the repetitive tasks. Now here, to achieve automation, we use scripting languages like Bash, Python, PowerShell and some other scripting languages, and tools like Ansible, Terraform, AWS CloudFormation and some other tools. So to achieve automation, we have scripting languages and also tools. But how automation works behind the scenes? It's very important. See, all scripting languages and tools communicate with AWS services using REST APIs under the hood. Let me explain that. See, assume that you have your AWS infrastructure or you have your AWS services. Now, the easiest way to communicate with your AWS infrastructure is from AWS Management Console. But apart from AWS Management Console, we have some other tools like AWS CLI, Boto3, Terraform, Ansible, right? Here, the important point is either AWS Management Console or AWS CLI or Boto3 or Terraform, or even if you have any other tool to communicate with your AWS infrastructure, all are internally using raw AWS REST APIs. Simply, all these tools uses raw AWS REST APIs to communicate with your AWS infrastructure. So, the raw AWS REST APIs are the core of AWS. They expose every service as programmable endpoints. And here, raw AWS REST APIs are developed and managed by Amazon. And you can get the detailed documentation about raw AWS REST APIs from the official documentation of AWS called docs.aws.amazon.com. So suppose I want to work with Amazon EC2 using REST APIs. Then click on that Amazon EC2. Then search for API documentation. See here Amazon EC2 API reference. Click on that. Now here click on actions. See, all these are different actions using which you can execute your required operation on EC2 services. But all are with AWS REST APIs. See, suppose let's say if I want to stop EC2 instances, then just click on this stop instances and then scroll down. It provides the API to execute stop instances. So now using this API, you can stop your required instances. And after executing this, you will get a response. So that response is in the form of XML. Be clear, it is not in the form of JSON. It is in the form of XML. So now, if you are good at REST API's concept with authentication and passing XML response, then directly use raw AWS REST APIs for your automation. Like Bash shell scripting with curl command, Python scripting with request module, or any other scripting language, and in that how to invoke your REST APIs. But Why most people don't use raw AWS REST APIs for automation? Because using raw AWS REST APIs is complex and time consuming to write all the logic for signing, sending and passing. Let me show you that. See, actually I tried to develop a bash shell script to get an IAM user details by executing raw AWS REST APIs through curl command. And for that logic, actually we need this much lengthy script, bash shell script. But anyway, finally I ended up with an error and I couldn't able to resolve that issue as well. See, actually that much difficulty is there to call raw AWS REST APIs. Now, instead of that, suppose if I use tool like AWS CLI, see, simply to get IAM user details, I can execute a command called AWS CLI AWS IAM get user username. Let's say one of the IAM user from my account. See that we are getting. So simply we executed a single Linux command like this and we got the required output. Now compared to executing raw AWS REST APIs, AWS CLI command is easy, no need to write this many number of lines. With one line we got the result. So instead of using raw AWS REST APIs, we will use tools like AWS CLI, Boto3, Ansible and Terraform. And what are the advantages if you use tools like these? The very first one is reduces code length and handles response as JSON. See, the default raw AWS REST API's response is an XML data, but using these tools you can get optionally response as JSON, and it is very easy to read and parse JSON data, right? And these tools also handles pagination and exceptions. And finally, be clear, all AWS automation tools uses raw AWS REST APIs internally. That's fine. But why Python for AWS cloud automation? See, each scripting language has its strengths, but Python is often the top choice for AWS automation because AWS officially supporting Boto3 SDK. See, basically SDK means software development kit. Simply Boto3 is the Python module, so using which we can easily execute any required operation, or we can easily interact with all AWS services. And as a Python developer, you know Python is a cross-platform language and huge ecosystem. Python is readable and beginner-friendly language. It is powerful and versatile. So that's why we are preferring Python for AWS cloud automation. So finally, you just remember this. Python Boto3 is using internally raw AWS API calls to interact with AWS infrastructure or AWS services for automation. Now let me give the objective of this course. See, by the end of this course, you will get Boto3 core concepts like session, client, resource, waiters, paginators, collections and filters. And here, be clear on this point. I will explain all these Boto3 core concepts with IAM and EC2 service, so that you will get the confidence to use Boto3 core concepts for any AWS service. So that's why first you just go through the complete course and then start using Boto3 for your real-time requirement for any AWS service. And here there are some prerequisites to continue with this course. They are: you must have AWS account and knowledge on AWS services. Actually, one AWS account is enough, but if you want to feel like production and non-production environments, then it's better to have at least 2 AWS accounts. And practicing requires a system like Windows, Linux, or an EC2 instance. And you must know how to install Python and Python concepts to develop scripts like index operations on list, key value operations on dictionary, and conditions, loops, functions, and exception handling. And finally, how to install any Python module or library or package. That's it. Okay, thank you.